we just wrapped up the first press con of the DFA under this new admin. You can see behind me, sa likod ko naman yung DFA flag. So just a quick update on what the first press con covered. Well, first of all, we're bringing you this recap because, again, it's the first face-to-face regular press briefing that the DFA had under this new admin. It's also been the first face-to-face regular press briefing we've had in a few years. Kasi sa time ni former SFA Locsin, we didn't have these kinds of regular press briefings in person. So just again, a quick few brief updates. Today we met yung bagong spokesperson ng DFA, si Ambassador Teresita Daza. She just wrapped up her post in Chile. So we can expect to see more of her. You can expect to see more of her as we cover the DFA under the new Marcos admin. I'll dive right into the main topics for today. It was around an hour-long press con, pero yung mga main topics lang naman talaga ay, first of all, there will be a lot of major ASEAN meetings next week. Of course, we can expect a lot of issues to be tackled here: Ukraine, Myanmar, pandemic recovery. On the issue of Myanmar specifically, the Philippines made its own statement today about the recent killings of democracy activists in Myanmar that occurred over the last few days. So just a brief background for context, the Myanmar military junta announced on Monday that it executed 4 democracy activists that it accused of helping to carry out so-called terror acts in the country. This was the first execution in decades, so of course it sparked widespread condemnation. In the Philippines, here today, they announced that we denounced the killings and that it displayed a lack of political will on the part of Myanmar to follow the 5-point consensus crafted by ASEAN. And of course, that 5-point consensus included building trust and confidence to foster dialogue among the countries and of course prevent more and put an end to the violence that is happening in the country. Still relating to ASEAN, what's notable about the ASEAN meetings next week that are expected to take place, it's also the first face-to-face meetings that will happen among foreign ministers in 2 years because of the pandemic. And again, it's expected to tackle a series of issues. So I mentioned, of course, Myanmar, Ukraine, pandemic recovery, but it will also tackle human rights and ensuring that Southeast Asia is kept free from nuclear weapons. What's interesting to note here is that there will be, aside from the ASEAN foreign ministers meeting with each other, there will also be meetings with external ministers. So external ministers meaning ministers who aren't part of ASEAN, but this include the foreign ministers or the Secretary of Foreign Affairs of different countries, including US, Japan, EU, and we'll list several countries, of course, in our story, so you should read that. But of course, one notable foreign minister who will be joining the external meetings is the foreign minister of Russia. So they talked about whether or not there will be moves to exclude Russia because of its invasion on Ukraine. And today, the DFA told us that the Philippines and ASEAN doesn't support moves to exclude Russia from these kinds of meetings because they want to make sure that ASEAN is a place that countries can turn to ensure the peaceful settlement of disputes. And they said that they don't want, ASEAN doesn't want to become a body that escalates tensions, but rather finds a way to de-escalate them. So no possibility of excluding Russia from these meetings in the region happening next week. Another big major issue that was discussed today was also the ICC. So of course, we know yesterday that President Bongbong Marcos met with a few cabinet members, including the Secretary of Foreign Affairs, to discuss the ICC. There is a pending investigation, of course, into killings that happened under the drug war of former President Rodrigo Duterte. And now we asked, of course, what the current approach to this issue is, if we're still going to be using the Duterte administration's approach to the issue to insist that, of course, local mechanisms and local courts should go first and prosecute these cases. And Today they confirmed that in fact that is the approach that the country is still taking. That the Philippines, they mentioned, is against atrocities, but wanted to stress the fact that the country has primary jurisdiction to prosecute crimes under the drug war. And now, a lot of people, and as you've read from our coverage, of course, of the ICC case, especially some of Rappler reporter Lian Bowen's stories, the local mechanisms, of course, have been slow. There have been few charges, if any, and so that brings about the question of how effective local responses have been to prosecute crimes under the drug war. But they stress that the ICC is a court of last resort and not, and that it doesn't replace local courts. And so we also asked if there are any talks of possibly rejoining the ICC under a new administration. But for now, it's a wait and see, because they say the Philippines, of course, they reminded the public that the Philippines is no longer a party to that, and that because the government is still in a period of transition, further consultations need to be taken on whether or not the Philippines will rejoin the ICC, if not in the near future, and then in the coming years. So that was really most of the major points talked about during the first press con of the DFA, again under in this face-to-face setup and under this new admin. We'll continue to bring you all the updates on what's happening in the DFA, also not only through our live recaps, but also through our stories. So be sure to check the Rappler site for any stories you might be interested in, and of course, keep watching our recaps.